some of the people and the rest of the world are focused on Taiwan. Uh, all right, back to you, Sir Gerard.
Now let's move on to the next officer to introduce to you our guest. We call on Captain Caruso Mario Antonio Tagat, a former military pilot, Philippine Air Force, retired airline pilot, and our beloved Director for Membership, Adult Sector. He is the from Villamor Air Base, Pasay City, Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Captain Caruso Mario Antonio Tagal. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you very much, Sir Gerard, for that introduction. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Arpan A. Chakravarti, a lawyer. And he will be speaking on the subject experiences from China's gray zone tactic on border dispute with India. And Attorney Arpan Chakravarti is a lawyer currently working as an honorary assistant director in strategy at Alexis Group, India. His research interests include law, national security, and foreign affairs of South Asian countries. Previously, he has interned with the Ministry of External Affairs, India, Center for Land Warfare Studies, and Autonomous Indian Army think tank, Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, and the Observer Research Foundation, among the organizations. He is multilingual and passionate about furthering the scholarship of law and national security in India and abroad. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to welcome Attorney Arpan Chakravarti.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. So, namaskar, everyone. I hope everyone is doing fine. And firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for putting together this brilliant and illustrious panel. And without much ado, I would like to jump into my lecture as I have to justify the 10 minutes which have been allotted to me. So today I shall be speaking on the topic experiences from China's gray zone tactics on border dispute in India. And I have decided to divide the lecture into three parts primarily. First being, why is there an emergence of gray zone warfare in international law? Second, I shall unfold the line of actual control conflict between China and India. And finally, I shall be talking regarding the India's approach to tackling such gray zone ambiguities in Indian Ocean region. So when we look into this, when we make laws, we create categories. When we interpret laws, we assign actions, actors, and events to the categories that we have created. And for law to be effective, we have to have a reasonable clarity and consensus about the contents and the value of our categories that we have mentioned. Like, for example, the concept of theft. For instance, it would make sense only if we have a shared understanding of what the concept of property and ownerships are. So similarly, I believe that this is equally true for any legal framework which governs conflict or any coercion. So my understanding of my understanding of gray zone warfare is a metaphorical state of being at war and peace, wherein an aggressor aims to reap either political or territorial gains associated with an overt military aggression. And this zone particularly represents an operating environment in which the aggressors use ambiguity and leverage non-attribution to achieve the strategic objectives that they had. Before me, Captain Carl had specifically showcased all the ambiguity, all the ships which we have seen in the Indian Ocean, in the South China Sea. So what we can say is that what we can understand is that gray zone warfare flourishes in ambiguity, distrust, and fear. In the recent times, we have seen that the different modes of gray zone warfare, which we can at least classify. First is the denial of attacks, the cyber attacks, the ransomware, and mostly the cyber operations which are being run by states. Secondly, the territorial encroachment, the current scenario which is happening in Taiwan. Just yesterday in India, almost 200 Chinese soldiers were being detained and sent back as they tried to attempt to cross the Tawang sector, which is a territorial part of India. The third is the economic coercion that we understand, the infamous debt traps that eventually have started deteriorating the democracies of, deteriorating economies of the country, such as Pakistan and Sri Lanka and many other countries. And the fourth, I believe, is the information warfare. The not so subtle Chinese mouthpiece, Global Times, have been writing opinion pieces, and they have been continuously trying to seed discontent regularly. And this we have also noticed and noticed that they have been actively trying to shape the opinions that go across the world. And the fifth I understand is the usage of proxies, pitting one country against another, funding of non-state actors among each other. So the question that always stays relevant in this point of time is how will this affect the international legal order? So, as to my understanding, gray zone warfares deliberately exploit these uncertainties to evade the legal responsibilities and to minimize the military, economic, and political consequences of the actions that have been conducted. And I understand that there is a dire need of consensus and reasonable clarity among like minded nations, and specifically which evolves around gray zone tactics. There is a trust deficit that I understand between nations and allies, as most recently what we have seen are the technological advancement and changes which are giving more options of deniability and no options of tracing them back. And because I understand that uh, gone are the days when conventional militaries would come to a particular terrain and they will fight wars. Now gray zone warfare has no boundaries, and the actors, they deliberately exploit these uncertainties. So, in this picture, I have showcased the Whitsun Reef, wherein the Chinese ships were being anchored around the reef. So when we have this LAC conflict between China and India. So after the Galwan incident, India has had 13 different rounds of talk to find or have attempted to find a political as well as a legal solution to the problem. But as in mid 2020, China and India have found themselves engaged in another long military face-off on the western sector of line of actual control. As both the nations, they had accused each other that they have been violating the status quo on the border. And this took a violent turn in intervening night of 15th and 16th of June on 2020. So over the decades, I will try to bring it down to various bullet points, which I have showcased here. Over the decades, we understand that since 1950, India and China, they have adopted various divergent approaches to the boundary question. For one, I understand that China does not acknowledge the McMahon line as the line of actual control because they have perceived it as the violation of principle of historic rights and injustice which has been done by the British imperialism, and thus they advance their own understanding of what boundary is, which has been vehemently refuted by India. And as for India, I understand LAC remains as a functional concept, as in much that to serve to avoid the military confrontation between both patrolling parties of both the sides. But if one has to argue, as being a lawyer, one has to argue that under the general principles of international law, unilateral declarations have a legal character, and the law of treaties has dealt at length on such declarations by state. The, However, the unilateral declarations that affect the right of each of these states must have a unilateral statement by the state actors. So it has to have an international character, and secondly, that it has to have a declaration which must be accepted by either by both the parties interested, or it should go unchallenged. Thus, the whole concept of the Chinese conception of the LAC does not have a strong basis under international law, since India has explicitly rejected it. Even then, when I go through the books of international law, China's own understanding, or even the history per se, China's own understanding of LAC has shifted from years. And thus, the claim that they are making regarding the continuity and historical right stands invalid, because they have made three statements in 3 years. In 1959, the Chinese government suggested that the armed forces of both the sides will have to withdraw 20 kilometers from the LAC along the entire Sino-Indian border and halt patrol. In 1970s, the People's Liberation Army, they said that no longer, we don't need to stay no longer than the 20 kilometers behind the Chinese version of LAC. And in 1993, when India and China did sign the Tranquility Agreement on both the matters, LAC, at that point of time, it was being showcased that LAC is merely a limit on border patrolling and not a validation of border claims. Thus, I understand that until now, there has been duality which persists through and through. And at this point of time, 13 rounds of talks have been concluded, and until now we do not have come up to any of the solution. Maybe they do not want to come to a solution. I do not understand that point, but it is very clear at this point of time that if they want to put the situation to stalemate, well, New Delhi won't be pushed around for the simple reason. So when I talk about gray zone warfare and its ambiguities, we at this point of time have an understanding that we are a democratic country, and as Honorable Justice said, that a rule-based order needs to come up. Well, I understand that India has been a firm believer of the most strategic and essential elements which binds South Asian countries together, and which is the rule of law and the freedom of navigation and overflight, peaceful resolution of disputes, and respecting each other's territorial integrity. And most importantly, I believe at this point of time, India is acting as a catalyst in unifying a cooperation or making among the states through an effective maritime enforcement awareness, which we in Navy terms we call it the MDA, which is defined as the ability to gather, process, analyze, and share real-time information about what is occurring at sea. So this capacity is vital for promoting marine safety, responding to vessels, and stopping illegal activity and tracking of the shipments, and protecting waters from illegal incursion from foreign vessels. So we have seen we have seen participation from 13 different countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, who are part of this part of India's Naval Information Fusion Center, and their liaison officers have been posted in India. and due to the only specific reason, which is to tackle the gray zone threats at sea in the Indian Ocean region. So, in conclusion, as to what this presentation I have made, I strongly condemn the Chinese action at sea and the usual cartographic aggressions that we are seeing since few moments, years. But I believe that China at this point of time is losing the access to once welcoming world, which at one point of time propelled or enabled its own growth, right? And while on the other hand, India, I do believe at this point of time is increasing its commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific through the values of trust, cooperation, and synergy, which at this point of time is very, very essential to tackle in quotes, I must say, the peaceful rise of China in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean as well. So thank you so much.
Hey, let's give a big hand to. It's very difficult to pronounce your last name.